As a retired Special Forces soldier, I've faced enemy fire, survived ambushes, and made impossible decisions under pressure. But nothing prepared me for the phone call I received on a quiet Tuesday morning. Phone vibrates on the kitchen counter. I glanced at the screen. Lincoln Middle School. For a split second, my heart stopped. Parents rarely receive calls from school with good news. My mind instantly raced. Did Jake get into a fight? Was he hurt? Did something happen? I answered immediately. "Hello, this is Ryan Mitchell." A calm woman's voice came through the speaker. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Mrs. Anderson, Jake's homeroom teacher." I tightened my grip on the phone. "Could you come to the school today? I'd really like to speak with you. In person." No explanation, no details, just those words. Before I could ask another question, she hung up. I stared at the silent phone for several seconds. Sarah looked up from the kitchen table. She immediately noticed the worry on my face. "Ryan, what's wrong?" I forced a small smile. "I'm not sure. The school called. They want to see me." Sarah slowly put down her coffee mug. Her expression turned serious. "Is Jake okay?" "I don't know. They didn't say." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Our home suddenly felt unusually quiet. Even little Lily stopped playing with her stuffed rabbit, as if she sensed something was wrong. I picked up my truck keys. "I'll call you as soon as I know." Sarah walked over and gently squeezed my hand. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it together." I nodded. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The 20-minute drive felt longer than any mission I'd ever been on. Every red light seemed to last forever. Every mile brought another question. Jake wasn't a troublemaker. He respected his teachers. He earned good grades. He was kind to everyone. So why had the school called me? My military training had taught me to prepare for the worst. But being a father, that was a battlefield no one could prepare you for. I parked outside Lincoln Middle School. Children laughed on the playground. Teachers walked through the hallways. Everything looked perfectly normal. Yet my heartbeat refused to slow down. Inside the front office, the receptionist smiled politely. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell. Mrs. Anderson is expecting you." She pointed toward the hallway. "Second door on the left." I thanked her and started walking. Each step echoed through the quiet hallway. Family artwork covered the walls. Student trophies filled glass display cases. As I reached the classroom door, I noticed it was already open. Mrs. Anderson stood beside her desk. She smiled warmly. But there was something unusual in her eyes. It wasn't concern. It wasn't disappointment. It was pride. She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Mitchell. Please, have a seat." I sat down, still expecting bad news. She folded her hands and looked directly at me. Then she said something I never expected to hear. "Mr. Mitchell, your son did something yesterday. Something I've never seen in all my 23 years of teaching." Ryan's heart pounded. Every terrible possibility raced through his mind. He leaned forward slightly. "What happened?" Mrs. Anderson smiled softly. "It started yesterday during lunch." She folded her hands on the desk. "There was a new student. His name is Ethan. He transferred here just 3 days ago." Ryan listened carefully. He was sitting alone in the cafeteria. "He didn't know anyone. He barely touched his lunch," Mrs. Anderson sighed. "I noticed some boys whispering about him. They laughed at his old backpack. They laughed because his shoes were worn out." Ryan's jaw tightened. Mrs. Anderson continued, I was about to step in, but before I could, Jake stood up. The noisy cafeteria suddenly became quiet. Jake picked up his lunch tray. Without saying a single word, he walked across the room. Every student watched him. He sat beside Ethan. Mind if I sit here? Ethan looked surprised. You want to sit with me? Jake smiled. Of course. No one should eat alone. Ethan looked down at his tray. They think I'm weird. Jake shrugged. They're wrong. My dad always says, courage isn't about fighting. It's about standing beside someone when everyone else walks away. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time all week, he smiled. Across the cafeteria, one of the older boys laughed loudly. Look, now there are two losers. Several students laughed. Ryan's hands slowly clenched into fists as he listened. Mrs. Anderson noticed. I know. I felt the same way. But then, your son surprised everyone. Ryan looked up. What did he do? He didn't yell. He didn't threaten anyone. He simply stood up. Jake calmly faced the group. His voice never became angry. He simply said, if making someone feel small makes you feel big, then maybe you're the one who needs help. The cafeteria fell silent. Not a single student laughed. Even the bully looked embarrassed. Mrs. Anderson smiled proudly. I've never seen 12-year-olds become so quiet. They realized Jake was right. Ryan felt his eyes becoming watery, but Mrs. Anderson wasn't finished. What happened next is the real reason I asked you to come. She opened the top drawer of her desk. Then she carefully placed a small notebook on the table. Ryan looked at it. It belonged to Jake. Mrs. Anderson gently opened the first page. Inside, Ryan saw dozens of names. Every name had a small check mark beside it. Confused, he looked at her. What is this? She smiled. This is something Jake has been doing for months. Ryan stared at the notebook, still not understanding. Mrs. Anderson looked directly into his eyes. Then she quietly said, your son has been keeping a secret from you. Ryan slowly picked up the notebook. His hands trembled. It looked ordinary. A simple blue notebook with worn edges. But somehow, it already felt priceless. Mrs. Anderson smiled gently. Go ahead. Open it. Ryan carefully turned the first page. At the top, written in Jake's neat handwriting, were the words, no one eats alone. Ryan frowned slightly. He looked back at Mrs. Anderson. I don't understand, she smiled. Keep reading. Ryan turned another page. There was a list of students. Beside every name, Jake had written small notes. Monday, Ethan. Ate lunch with him. Smiled today. Tuesday, Olivia. Helped her with math. Wednesday, Noah. Sat with him after everyone ignored him. Thursday, Emma. Walked her to class because she was scared. Ryan blinked. There were dozens of names. Page after page after page. Every week for nearly 6 months. Ryan slowly looked up. Jake did all this? Mrs. Anderson nodded. Every single day. He quietly looks around the cafeteria. If he notices someone sitting alone, he sits beside them. If someone is being bullied, he becomes their friend. He never asks for recognition. He never tells anyone. Ryan felt a lump in his throat. I never knew. Mrs. Anderson smiled warmly. That's because he never wanted you to. He always says, kindness only matters when nobody is watching. Ryan froze. His eyes slowly filled with tears. Those words, he knew those words. His mind drifted back years earlier. Jake had been only 7, one rainy afternoon. They had been walking home together. A homeless veteran sat quietly outside a grocery store. Without hesitation, Ryan had bought him a hot meal. Jake had asked, "Dad, why didn't you tell anyone?" Ryan had smiled. "Because real kindness isn't a performance. You don't help people so others will clap. You help because it's the right thing to do." Jake had never forgotten. Mrs. Anderson gently closed the notebook. "But that's still not why I called you." Ryan looked surprised. "There's more?" She nodded. "Yesterday, after lunch, I found Ethan crying outside the library. I asked him what was wrong. He told me nobody had talked to me since my family moved here. I thought today would be just like every other day." Then Jake sat beside me. For the first time in months, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Mrs. Anderson's own eyes became watery. She paused before continuing. "He told me something I'll never forget." Ryan leaned forward. "What did he say?" Mrs. Anderson smiled through tears. "He said, 'Jake didn't save my day. He saved my hope.'" Silence filled the classroom. Ryan lowered his head. A single tear rolled down his cheek. For years, he had worried about teaching Jake how to become a good man. Without realizing it, Jake already had. Cliffhanger. Mrs. Anderson reached into her desk one last time and placed a sealed white envelope in front of Ryan. She smiled softly. "This isn't from me. It's from Ethan." Ryan stared at the envelope, not knowing that the words inside would become one of the most treasured memories of his life. Ryan stared at the white envelope lying on Mrs. Anderson's desk. For a moment, he couldn't bring himself to open it. Mrs. Anderson smiled gently. "Ethan asked me to give this to you. He said, 'Please make sure Jake's dad reads it.'" Ryan slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was uneven, as if every word had been written with shaking hands. He began to read. "You don't know me. My name is Ethan. Before I came to Lincoln Middle School, I hated going to school. My dad passed away last year. My mom works 2 jobs. We had to move because we couldn't afford our old house anymore. I thought nobody would ever want to be my friend. On my first day, everyone laughed at my old shoes. I wanted to eat lunch in the bathroom so nobody could see me. Then your son sat beside me. He didn't ask why my clothes were old. He didn't ask why I was alone. He just smiled and treated me like I mattered. Yesterday was the first time I came home from school smiling. So, thank you. You raised a hero. Ethan." Ryan stopped reading. The classroom became completely silent. A single tear rolled down his cheek. He folded the letter carefully. "This means more than any medal I've ever received." Mrs. Anderson smiled through her own tears. "I thought you'd say that." "Jake doesn't know." Ryan looked at her. "Does Jake know about this letter?" Mrs. Anderson shook her head. "No. He asked me not to tell him. He said, 'If Ethan is smiling again, that's enough for me.'" Ryan closed his eyes for a moment. That sounded exactly like Jake, always helping, never asking for credit. At that moment, Ryan realized something. For years, he had tried to teach Jake how to become a good man. Without noticing, Jake had already become one. The drive home felt completely different. The same roads, the same traffic. But Ryan couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's words. "You raised a hero." As a soldier, people had called him brave. They had given him medals. They had saluted his service. But nothing had ever made him feel as proud as that simple letter. When Ryan pulled into the driveway, Jake was outside, A basketball rested near his feet. He smiled the moment he saw his dad. "Hey, Dad, how was your meeting?" Ryan looked at him for several seconds. Jake frowned. "Everything okay?" Without saying a word, Ryan walked over and pulled Jake into the biggest hug he'd ever given him. Jake laughed awkwardly. "Dad, what was that for?" Ryan stepped back. His eyes were still watery. He smiled. "I'm just really proud of you." Jake looked confused. "For what?" Ryan gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "For becoming the kind of man this world desperately needs." Jake smiled shyly. "I learned from you." Ryan quietly shook his head. "No, son. I think I've started learning from you." That evening, the Mitchell family sat around the dinner table. Sarah noticed the peaceful smile on Ryan's face. She raised an eyebrow. "So, what happened at school?" Ryan reached into his pocket. He handed Ethan's letter to Sarah. As she read it, her eyes filled with tears. She looked across the table at Jake. Jake looked completely confused. "What?" Sarah stood up, walked over, and kissed Jake gently on the forehead. "You have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met." Jake blushed. "I didn't really do anything." Ryan smiled. "That's exactly why it mattered. People often ask me what courage looks like. After serving in the military, I thought courage meant running toward danger. But my son taught me something different. Sometimes courage is simply sitting beside someone who feels alone. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who fight. They're the ones who choose kindness when nobody is watching. And if we all did that, this world would become a much better place." Jake quietly noticed another new student sitting alone in the cafeteria the next day. Without hesitation, he picked up his lunch tray, walked across the room, and sat beside him with a warm smile.